So during the last 2 days, we've had many important arguments on how circular economy solutions can help us move away from an economy of haste and waste, and also reboot the economy sustainably. We've also heard how COVID-19 has affected corporate circularity and how we have progressed in different parts of the world and what partnering means in the new era. We've also had a sobering reminder from the North American and Africa sessions that circularity is embedded differently in different cultures, and therefore expanding circular economy in various regions will take diverse routes. Now, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't be sharing secrets here, and it's an important role that the secrets and sharing play, and we've heard of what role education takes and what a fantastic business case circular economy is, and let alone what tremendous help circular economy roadmaps can be in the transition towards.
Oh, indeed. I think it's hard to notice when you think about it, like how much has started to change, and when that change is happening, you don't always see what's happening. But I think just in the last few years, quite a lot has started to change when you look at it. And I think the roadmaps really go to show that just that, basically. And just in Europe, over 20 countries have published national circular economy roadmaps and strategies just in the last few years. And this also applies to businesses, that things are actually happening. 1/4 of large firms in Finland have circular economy as part of their strategy. And venture capital and the number of circular economy funds and bonds have grown manifold in the last few years, and actually performing better through the crisis. And we may just have reached peak oil and peak meat. And we have seen in the videos throughout the WCEFonline that many of the solutions are right in front of us. So, and these don't just look at cleaning up waste, but effectively, by design, avoid it. And we already have a second EU Circular Economy Action Plan, where we have increasingly started to look at the source of the problems upstream. But now we want to make the circular economy mainstream. And to do just that, we will, in today's final session along this journey, really begin to close the loop. And we'll pick up where we started in the first session, looking at 2 key enablers for circularity: finance and policy. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into this with some fresh results from the Ellen White and the MacArthur Foundation.
And so, just final reminder of technical instructions. If you're just tuning in, there are good news and bad news. The bad news is that you have missed 5 excellent sessions. The good news is that you have 5 excellent sessions ahead of you. You can look forward to enjoying them in the next few weeks. Should you have any questions, do reach out. And above all, keep the chat alive. So I believe we're going to our first poll, and as we're nearing the end of the first poll of the last session, as we're nearing the end of the 2-day Circular Summit, it would be wonderful to hear your feedback. So our question will be, and you can obviously find the poll in the same place, in the chat box. And really, what did you find most interesting during the WCEFonline? And this is something that, Tim, I'm looking forward to, particularly.
Yeah, so am I.
Let's see whether we're getting results already.
We're getting a lot of things, but we're not seeing any
we aren't seeing the poll or the results yet.
We're getting there.
No, that will be fascinating. What would be your choice?
Well, I think it's so tempting to just go with all of the above, but I want to resist that temptation and say that it's still probably, that on partnerships and kind of finding this networking aspect that we have been trying to gently nudge the audience along all along. And I want to do that again, just to encourage you to do get busy in the chat throughout this final session today. ask questions. And are we getting some?
We are getting some
yes.
results, and well, I think it's fantastic that the keynote speeches seem to resonate. They're getting a good chunk of votes, and obviously the discussions during the sessions, learning about the possibilities the circular economy provides in the recovery. That was my personal favorite, I can say now. And yeah, it's a nice spread.
Yeah, the networking part, I think we have to nudge them a little bit harder there. Don't you think so?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree with
really
you. But it's also that I think understandably the rebooting the economy is such a current issue now.
Fair enough. It's the theme of the event.
It is the theme of the event and the theme of the day.
And I think that actually brings us to the next thing that we will now start to slowly move over this broadcast. And I'm really delighted to hand over the reins to my former colleague, Ashima Sukhdev, Government and Cities Lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, one of the organizations that I think is fair to say has really made the circular economy into what it is today, with some great thinkers like Ken Webster, not least. And I want to thank him, and also a personal thank you to Łukasz Holwitz and to Nora Clinton, also from my side. And there's so much we could pick up on here. There's the New Plastics Economy, the Disruptive Innovation Festival, and I think more recently, there's From the Gurgling Gut to the project on finance. I really look forward to hearing what you have in store for us today. So over to you, Ashima. We'll be hearing from you shortly.
Thank you in the Helsinki studio so much, Tim, and to the rest of our colleagues at Citra in the Helsinki studio. From our end here, a big warm welcome to the final session of the World Circular Economy Forum. This session, as Tim mentioned, is going to focus on finance and policy. We have a lot in store. We're going to start off with a conversation with Dame Ellen MacArthur in the studio here with us, followed by a dialogue on finance with the European Investment Bank, and finally closing off with a panel on policy with representatives from the OECD, Chile, and IKEA. I think there's a few main things we can expect to hear from some of these conversations today. The first is just a reminder as to why finance and policy are actually really important to the transition to a circular economy. And secondly, hopefully a call to action to the financial sector and to policymakers to really make the most of this moment that we're in right now, to elevate the conversation and to elevate the circular economy to the mainstream. Please do engage with us throughout the session in the chat. We have our colleagues on standby there to answer any questions that you might have. So without further ado, to kick us off, I'm delighted to welcome Ellen MacArthur in our studio here today, who is, of course, the founder of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ellen, it's great to have you here with us. Thank you so much for being here. You obviously started EMF 10 years ago this month, and have been a big part of the evolution and the scaling of the idea of the circular economy. It'd be great to start our conversation off just looking back at that journey. In those very early days, what was it about the idea of a circular economy that really motivated you and inspired you?
Thanks, Ash. I think for me it was the fact that the circular economy is a goal to move towards. It wasn't something to run away from. It was something which set a target. And I think if you have a target, if you have a goal, then that enables you to get closer to it. And I love the fact that the circular economy went right to the root cause, or the root causes of many of our biggest global challenges, and started to unpick them and rewrote that story and was able to build that regenerative, restorative economy, which is ultimately an opportunity. And for me, that word opportunity has always resonated in, what do we want success to look like? Where are we trying to get to? And that painted that picture of regenerative, restorative, of designing out waste, keeping products and materials in use, and also regenerating natural systems. So it's all about positive things to do.
Absolutely, and it's always been a story of optimism. Thinking back to kind of the last decade, really, could you share a few stories or kind of tipping points where you saw, actually, this is a moment where I feel like we are making progress towards that goal?
I think one of the first things that, for me, really indicated that the circular economy could work at scale were the first economic reports that we did. That first one with McKinsey, January 2012, at the World Economic Forum, showing that there was a significant economic opportunity in the circular economy, because the idea resonates, the idea makes sense. Of course, if you go from a straight line to a circle, it can go on forever. That's so simple. But actually that put a monetary value to it. That said, does circular beat linear? What is the economic value? And that showed positive in every single way. And yes, it does decouple growth from resource constraints. Yes, it is for good for business. Yes, it is for the wider economy. It's regenerative, it's restorative. The more we do, the better. The faster we do this, the better. For me, that was a big thing. I think looking back at the work around the new plastics economy and realizing that if you're actually physically going to change a global material flow, you need everyone around the table. You need the biggest players around the table to agree on what success looks like, so you don't have those 100 innovations in 100 directions adding up to not a solution. That, for me, has also been a really, really big moment, because that was having very difficult conversations with absolute competitors around what are we trying to get to then put things in place. So that's been a big thing. And also just the general communication around opportunity. That has led to a significant change in people's mindsets around, the more we do this, the better. The faster we get there, the better. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess focusing in now a little bit more on this last year, which has obviously been a difficult one for all of us. What are some of your reflections on the last 6 months? Were you worried at any point that the momentum behind the circular economy was going to slow down?
I'd say, when COVID hit, none of us knew what to expect. I think, the world is still in crisis, isn't it? We are far from through this pandemic, but nobody knew where the balls were going to fall. But very, very early conversations in that total chaos of the first few weeks and months showed us that not only had circular economy embedded before it hit, but actually in many cases people were restating that it was important to them. They were working out how circular economy could help them move forward. And I think that was incredibly positive as a message to come back to us, because of course everything's in the air and people are trying to work out what that new normal would look like, but actually circular economy seems to be very deeply embedded in those conversations that we've had, both actually within the corporate world and businesses and innovators and designers, and also in the policy space as well.
And what was it about the circular economy idea, or the solution space that it plays in, that actually made people feel like this is still a relevant conversation now today, given our economic crisis, given our climate crisis, and so on?
I think COVID has exposed many challenges within the way the global economy runs. When you look at supply chains, they're actually very brittle, they're very long, they're actually very easily disrupted by something on this scale. What we see within circular design and circular innovation is that you become less dependent on these long supply chains, but you decouple your growth from those supply chains. You start to find new sources of material, you start to remanufacture, you look at creating the same products but in different ways. So actually there you decoupling from those fragile supply chains. So we've seen lots of conversations around this evolution towards circularity. And I think when you look at the investment that governments have put in, the stimulus packages to help the economy move forward, actually we have an opportunity here. We have a moment in time. We can build back better, as we've heard so often, but by being more resilient once we've put circular economy into play. When we look at regenerating natural systems, what a phenomenal opportunity. So it's about using this moment and the narrative that's now there between government and businesses, because in a way that's almost never been stronger.
Exactly. What are some examples of either statements that leaders have made in the last 6 months, or examples of how companies and governments have kind of been stepping up and actually still supporting this circular economy agenda? Do you have any that you can share? Yeah.
I mean, we've had conversations that I don't think without the pandemic we would have had so soon, very, very positively around circular economy, and the fact there is that strong dialogue between business and government, and how important that is in the circular economy transition. If you look at Ursula von der Leyen's statement around circular economy, she was saying a modern circular economy helps us to be more resilient for Europe. I mean, that's the top of the European system, and it's being recognised very much as one of the main building blocks of moving out of this crisis and trying to build something that is more resilient in the future and more regenerative.
Exactly. And just at the World Circular Economy Forum over the last 2 days as well, there's been so many instances of other leaders kind of backing the circular economy as well. So it's definitely encouraging to see how it's not lost its momentum. If anything, it's more relevant than ever. So that's fantastic. As I mentioned, that the rest of the session is really focused on the role of government and the role of finance. It'd be great to dip into that a little bit more. Based on what you've seen, and I mean, Ursula von der Leyen is a great example of that, what role do governments have to play in accelerating the transition to a circular economy?
I think, governments, they create the playing field for businesses, be it a huge corporation or a startup, to operate within. And, although in many ways you could say you can reach part of circularity through business decisions individually, actually when we look at things like the new plastics economy, or you look at how regenerative agriculture could play out at scale, government has a huge role to play and is able to speed this up. So I think what's really important is that very strong dialogue between business and government and sectors and government to make the right calls now to help to put the right things in place to help circular economy to accelerate faster, because now really does feel like the time.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned the stimulus packages as well. I think this is a moment to make sure we don't get stuck into linear lock-in, otherwise we're at risk of that. Exactly. And now turning to finance, we at the Foundation have obviously been quite focused on that topic over the last year. Could you tell us a little bit about how the financial sector has kind of entered this conversation and what you've seen them doing to support this?
Yeah, I'd say in the last couple of years, the conversations with financial institutions have just gone like this. Initially conversations, that's led to actions. And what we're seeing, especially really on the back of things like the new plastics economy or the work around textiles and fashion, is if these businesses are pledging to go from here to here, how are they going to fund part of that? And then the interest in funding that, and how does this all happen? And there are many conversations going now that weren't there 2 years ago, and were just beginning a year ago. And when we look at the speed of public equity funds, corporate bonds, I mean, they're just increasing incredibly quickly. So this, I think we're still at the beginning. It's still an early story, but finance, of course, plays a phenomenal role in the transition to a circular economy, and its eyes are very open.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be hearing more about that very soon. We're almost up with time, but I just wanted to wrap up now looking at the next 10 years. What keeps you optimistic?
I think ultimately circular economy has the potential to go to the root causes of many of the world's greatest challenges, global challenges. And when you get to that root cause, you then turn the economy into the solution rather than the problem, or part of the solution rather than the problem. And when that economy is circular, when that economy is driven by opportunity, when that economy can decouple growth from resource constraints, when it actually is about building something regenerative and restorative, then the faster we do that, the better. You're able to solve some of the world's biggest challenges with the economy itself. That keeps me incredibly optimistic.
That's fantastic to hear. And thank you for starting off this session on such a great note. Thanks for being here with us today, and we're looking forward to obviously following everything you do going forward. Thanks, Ellen. So we've just touched on the surface of why finance is a critical enabler. Let's dive a bit deeper into this. Any change in the real economy, as we've just discussed, needs to be reflected in the financial sector. Finance is crucial to how we use products, how we access services. It's crucial to how businesses function and the economy runs more broadly. Earlier this month, we at the Foundation launched a report on financing the circular economy that was backed by leading investment managers and banks, and has just seen sort of the exponential interest increase significantly. As part of that launch, we spoke to a number of finance leaders in the space. Let's now take a very quick look at what Larry Fink, who is the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, actually has to say on the topic.
The simplicity of understanding what the circular economy means. I mean, everybody can relate to that. We launched this fund. We're right nearly at $1 billion in scale now, and we're just beginning. We look at this as I said, one of our foundational products to really excite more and more investors.
There you have a clip of Larry Fink, chairman and CEO of BlackRock, talking about the Circular Economy Investment Fund that they launched last year. He's just one of the many leaders that have really been compelled into action by the idea of a circular economy. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Michiel de Smet. Michiel runs our finance initiative and is going to guide us through this next session. section of the session. He's going to share some of the insights from that report that I mentioned before inviting in our great guest speaker, Shiva Dustar from the European Investment Bank. Michiel, it's over to you now.
The insights from our work on finance. As you mentioned earlier this month, we launched our paper on financing the circular economy in conversation with BlackRock CEO Larry Fink and Barclays CEO Ches Staley. And in addition, we were delighted to see over 30 CEOs and senior executives from leading investment managers, leading banks endorsing the paper. In total, they represented over $18 trillion in assets under management and includes BlackRock, Barclays, Credit Suisse, Citi, HSBC, JP Morgan, Intesa Sanpaolo, Morgan Stanley, UBS, and many more. We believe this clearly speaks to the growing circular economy momentum within the financial sector. So what's in the report? I'll share a few key findings. First of all, the circular economy offers a massive opportunity to the finance sector, as it will help them deliver on goals related to climate change, loss of biodiversity, plastic pollution, and other global challenges. And at the same time, it provides new and better growth opportunities. So that's one. Secondly, we clearly see the transition happening as companies and governments are adopting its principles. This is, for example, reflected in entire industries that have started to transform, such as fashion and plastic. Thirdly, the market is taking off. In the past 18 to 24 months, we've seen a steep growth in circular economy financing activity. Let me give you a few examples, as you already hinted at. Back in 2017, we saw or no such fund existed, but by mid-2020, there were 10 public equity funds dedicated solely or partially to the circular economy, launched by the world's leading providers, including BlackRock, Credit Suisse, and Goldman Sachs. Also, in the past 18 months, at least 10 corporate bonds financing circular economy activity have been issued by global companies such as Google, BASF, PepsiCo, and Philips, with the support of leading investment banks such as Barclays, HSBC, ING, Morgan Stanley, and many more. And we see a similar pattern, a steep growth pattern across the financial services sector, covering private market funds, including venture capital, private equity, private debt, but also bank lending and insurance. For example, Intesa Sanpaolo launched a €5 billion credit facility to support circular companies. Now, finally, the paper is calling on the financial sector to build on this initial momentum and scale the circular economy together with governments and corporates. And indeed, this will require both public sector and private sector action and will be underpinned by better data. This, for example, would include better performance, circularity performance measurement as provided by Circulytics, which is the foundation's circularity measurement tool. Now, in that context of next steps towards scaling finance for the circular economy, blended finance has an important role to play. It will help de-risk investments, it will help attract private sector capital, and can provide necessary structuring advice. Hence, I'm also delighted to invite today Shiva Dustar, who's head of Innovation Finance Advisory at the European Investment Bank. Shiva, good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today. As explained, the report is laying out, giving an overview of the circular economy financing landscape, and it's great to see how active the European Investment Bank has been, ranging from having spent €2.5 billion in lending to circular projects, to actually launching a €10 billion initiative, debt and equity initiative dedicated to the circular economy. So on our side, very exciting to see that activity. Now, going back to the beginning, can you tell us a little bit more about what led you to exploring the circular economy?
Thanks a lot, Michiel, and delighted to be here. Congratulations to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for the launch of the report. It's an excellent piece of work, and I think Ellen MacArthur Foundation has really been instrumental in its convening power, in its thought leadership, and in fact, it was the very first report that I read, the McKinsey one. It caught my attention when I saw $1 trillion opportunity. So that's how it's, I mean, how did it start? I think, circular economy as a label, of course, kind of came into the bank probably in 2014, and I will tell you a bit more about that. But before if we now look at our projects, we did finance projects that sort of would qualify as circular economy in the resource efficiency area and waste management and so on. But I have to say that it kind of came into the bank through, in fact, the innovation angle, an area where Innofin Advisory, that's the area that I'm leading, we were actually asked by the European Commission already in 2014 to look at what it would mean to finance circular economy. And what was very fascinating about it is that at the same time, in that framework program, Innofin, the big financial instrument, was launched. And what was quite, I guess, mind-boggling for us when we did the initial study, which was launched in 2015, we realized that the Innofin instrument did not have business model innovation as an eligible criteria. And so early on in that period when that instrument was launched, we made the recommendation to the European Commission and the EIB through the advisory channel to say, if you want this Innofin program to really also tackle circular economy, you need to absolutely add, in addition to technological innovation, process innovation, also business model innovation. So looking at it, we really have come sort of from the innovation angle. And if we look at the current portfolio, yes, we have obviously continued to invest in projects that have this sort of more classical waste management, resource efficiency angles, and would qualify as circular economy projects. But where we have really made big progress is in financing the sort of innovative technology companies that really turn sewage water into energy, or titanium scrap into bringing those back into the production of new planes, and so the innovation angle. And I think this is actually quite exciting. And with that, we have also hopefully achieved a mindset change within the bank of looking at everything we do with a circular mindset.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree. I guess the upstream design angle, the innovation angle, the positive opportunity angle is definitely a perspective we favor as well. Now, if you think about circular economy opportunities for the IB, where do you see the greatest potential? And for example, how does it help the EIB in achieving its climate targets? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Absolutely. So basically, I mean, it's hard to say where the greatest opportunities are, because actually what we are seeing right now, we're sort of having done a lot of the groundwork over the last 4 or 5 years, with the groundwork meaning having set up internally a certain level of taxonomy, at least understanding what we mean with circular economy, having adapted our lending guidelines to bring in circular economy into the decision is into the credit risk assessment and decision making. What we really see as the greatest opportunity for the EIB is actually to, across all the projects, see whether circularity can be embedded, because we of course finance a lot of infrastructure projects, and clearly there is room to bring it in. We have, I would say, the big opportunities will be, for instance, in turning cities from more linear, unsustainable cities into circular cities, and or if you look at our bioeconomy and our agri-culture activities, which have also grown a lot, there is so much room to bring in an additional layer of circularity in those projects. And effectively, therefore, what the greatest opportunity is to see our lending, which is roughly 60 billion a year, have across the board circular aspects built in. And I think what hopefully will bring us to this objective is that we have very strong technical expertise in the bank. We have our engineers across various sector groups who really are now having that circular mindset, and they help project promoters in in bringing those circular issues into their projects. And we have, of course, a financial advisor. So we hope that those, it's not just the money, but also the brain that comes to that and helps us to achieve that lofty objective.
Yeah, thank you. I guess that circular mindset, thinking about how to rethink the system, redesign the system, and approach projects in a different way is very important, in addition to the capital itself, obviously. You already hinted at a few examples. Could you give us more examples on what the EIB actually is doing to capture that circular economy potential?
Yes, I mean, actually, the latest transaction that we finance is Borealis. It's the R&D program, 250 million, which we signed, in fact, just in September, a few days ago. Basically financing their R&D activities in Austria, Sweden, Finland. So this is a sort of an example where we're taking our corporate lending practice and helping companies to really shift into bring in products that then will help the circular economy, sort of to take off. And, so that's one type of projects. But as I said, we have right now in our portfolio some very interesting projects in the fashion. On the fashion side, we are, for instance, advising a company that is developing technology that actually allows you to use cotton, to basically use old clothes and turn them into cotton equivalents. I heard earlier Dame Ellen refer to the circular fashion. This is clearly a big area where we hope to look at, along the value chain at the investment opportunities. I would say on the plastics front, we also are actively, we're doing actually a study on plastics and the value chain of plastics, and we see quite a lot of interesting investment opportunities, on the plastics front, but also the replacement of plastics. And here we see on the circular bioeconomy space, also very interesting projects where you are looking at the demonstration phase, and you need to really then bring in, more debt type financing into it. So I would say, the EIB, therefore, in that sense, we would like to look at it across the board. And I would certainly invite any promoters that are operating, or certainly the financial sector, who are also very actively working with us, meaning the banks, some of them you mentioned earlier, they have these big credit lines. Very often they come to the EIB for a risk sharing on their portfolios, because with that they get some capital relief and they can actually have their money go further.
Yeah, thank you. And great to see those examples coming from a few key sectors we're also looking into. And by the way, in the paper, we do an analysis of 10 sectors within the entire economy. And while opportunities can be found across the economy, it turns out that plastics, fashion, and agriculture and food are those on top of the list in terms of growth potential in the near term of circular practices. Now, looking ahead, where do you see circular economy financing going at the IB over the coming years, but also more broadly in general? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yes, we are starting a new financial sort of framework period in 2021, and it's really heartwarming for those of us who have been now working this space to see that circular economy is sort of on the lips of all the commissioners, Frans Timmermans, but also President of the European Commission. It's sort of, I don't think 7 years ago it was sort of as present as a concept, and therefore as part, it's a key pillar of the EU Green Deal, and with the systemic change that it requires. I think for the EIB as a bank of the European Union, as a climate bank, we just see huge opportunities. Specifically, looking at Horizon Europe, for instance, we have, as you know, the missions approach. We have 5 missions, of which 4, if you think of them, have circularity embedded in them. Whether it's clean cities, whether it's clean oceans, whether it is climate adaptation, whether it's food and soil. And then the 5th mission is cancer. But I bet, if we put our head around it, even cancer may have some elements of circularity. That's maybe for your foundation to look at. So here are the great opportunities for the EIB as to not only invest in projects that help those missions, but also, and you mentioned earlier, to develop some blended instruments that are perhaps targeting certain areas where there are still gaps in our own tool of financing, our financing sort of toolkit, as well as emerging things that are coming up. And I think that the other big opportunity, of course, is how digital and climate technologies will reinforce each other. And I think for circular economy, this is probably going to be a big new thing for us. Just think of the sensor and AI, and it's probably, it's just a matter of joining up these things to look for and finding those opportunities.
Yes, thank you. And I can only agree. I mean, there's so much you mentioned, that the importance of technology as an enabler, the link to climate change, and how circular economy is a crucial part of the solution. And then actually getting to the fifth mission on cancer, well, I could see medical equipment and refurbishing imaging equipment, for example, definitely is a great example of how companies already nowadays, like Philips, are making most of the circular economy opportunity.
You're absolutely right. I had not thought of that, and this is spot on. So we need to look at the cancer as well.
Yes, well, definitely. And there's actually, in the paper, we do talk about it. So there is, the market is forecasted to grow quite significantly over the 10 coming years. So there's more in the paper. Shiva, thanks a lot for being here today with us and sharing your insights. I'm very much looking forward to following up with the IB and seeing how you continue to seize the opportunities and bring forward the circular economy. For those in the audience that are interested in hearing EIB's Vice President, Emma Navarro, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, and many other senior executives from the financial services sector talking about the circular economy opportunity, I'd warmly welcome you to have a look at the Foundation's webpage focusing on finance, where you can also find our position paper. Thank you very much. And Ash, back to you.
Thank you so much, both. That was a fascinating discussion on finance. We're now going to take a very short break where we'll be playing a video about a business called Suncrafters. This is one business that was on a list of 39 circular solutions that Citra has just released. We definitely recommend you check that out. After the video, I'll be joined back in the studio with my colleague Miranda Schnittke, who will be talking to us about policy, and we'll be bringing in some more online guests as well.
Suncrafter upcycles off-grid solar generators from decommissioned solar modules, and by that we on the one hand produce clean energy and on the other hand reduce solar waste. Suncrafter products are circular, they're off-grid, and they're solar powered, which is already a pretty unique combination in itself. But it's not only the product that is very sustainable, also the use cases are in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Investments will follow suit as soon as there is reliable and predictable financial value in a circular product. And therefore I think it's to policymakers to set economic incentives on the one hand, potentially tax cuts, for example, and on the other hand, provide a really reliable legislative framework for the circular product. Only if those two are given, investment as well as customer trust will follow suit.
Hello and welcome back to the final part of our session. On to policy now. I'm joined by my colleague Miranda, who leads our efforts on national governments. It's great to have you here with us to guide us through this next bit of the discussion.
Thanks, Ash. It's great to be here.
So before you bring on the rest of our guests, it'd be great to hear from you actually on what you think the role of policy and governments is in the circular economy transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see policy alongside finance as an absolutely key tool in enabling the transition. And across our work, I think we're starting to see that emerge in certain areas. So particularly around upstream choices, policy has a key role to play. It can inform and support design decisions and business model decisions that Shiva was just mentioning, to help make those become the norm. And that can be across all the different sectors that we're thinking about here. On the other side, it can also really help us move from like the system that we currently have with a bit of waste management as the focus to actually moving to resource management. And that can work for materials and nutrients. And that's quite an exciting area because there are lots of different loops to think about there. So moving to resource management is something that policy can really help with. And then thinking about the economy as a whole, policy has a really important part in helping to make the economics of the transition work at scale, because there are a whole raft of economic policy instruments that can help move us in that direction. And then actually picking up on that topic of investment and finance, policy also can use its financial capabilities and investment capabilities to steer and to guide investment towards infrastructure, innovation, and also the skills that we're going to need as we go forward. So it's really a really broad range of areas. And I think through all of those things, what policy in particular can do is really set a direction of travel. And in setting that direction of travel, it's giving a sense of direction for all the other actors in the system. And that's also why it's really important to bring in lots of voices into the policy discussion. So how that dialogue plays out, how policies are developed, how they're implemented, I think that's an equally important part to think about the development of policy as well as what the specific policies are. So it's a broad framework, but I also want to make sure that we bring in some voices of the experts that we have here today. I'm really delighted to be joined by Carolina Schmidt, who's the Minister of Environment for Chile, as well as Lena Prip-Kovac, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at IKEA, and also Shardul Agrawala, who is the head of the Economic and Environment Integration Division at the OECD. So welcome, everyone. I'm really glad to have you here. And we're going to just try and get a glimpse, we don't have too much time, but a glimpse into what is happening in policy, and the Minister will help us with that, how this supports and impacts on business. So I'm delighted that we have IKEA here today, and also what more is needed. And I'm going to explore that a bit with Shardul as we go forward. So hello and welcome everybody. Minister Schmidt, thank you so much for being here and making the time. Chile is in the process of developing a circular economy roadmap. So I'd love it if you could tell us a bit about why Chile picked up the opportunity of circular economy, what you want it to achieve for Chile. And also, I have to ask this, how has the pandemic affected your commitment to that? How is it going forward?
Well, thank you a lot. It's a real pleasure to be here today. In Chile, we have a dream to have a country without garbage and a more inclusive and sustainable development. And for that, circular economy is key. This is why we are building our roadmap to circular economy. And we are doing, in a sense, to be a long-term view with the participants of all sectors, private sector, public sector, and the academia, so we can decide how to transform the way we produce and we consume in our country with this view in mind. And we are very happy of the results we are having, a full participation of all sectors, and we are setting clear goals that must be not only in numbers and how efficient this is for our economies, but especially how good is for our people. So we are setting goals for all sectors that have to do, with a social pillar, how affecting people, and economic impact and environmental impact. We are setting a goal for 2040, we get more than 180,000 new formal jobs of, circular economy jobs, as well as to increase our recycling rate from our actual 14% to 65% of recycling in our country. And regarding your question about the pandemic and what has been easier and what has been more difficult, and let's start saying that nothing has been easier with this pandemic. It's affecting in a very severe way. And the main thing that we can see very fast is the disruption of the recycling chain in our country. So we have to develop very fast a plan to go and help of the people, of the jobs that we're being losing, especially informal jobs that are now in the recycling chain in our country, to go and help that and do not cut the recycling rate that we were having in the country, and helping the people in that. And also we saw a very strong increase in all the plastic waste because of the gloves and the mask and all that. And we are getting now a law that is banning the single-use plastics in our country, especially in the deliveries of food, and changing that to compostable plastic and certificate compostable plastic. And we are happy because we got unanimous consent in this law in the Senate just a few weeks ago. So we are going to pass that law that will help on that. And what has been the good thing is that we know that the COVID is very, very strong, affecting people, but also is an opportunity to accelerate our transformation to a low carbon, sustainable and circular economy. So that's why we are using the recovery plan for the COVID-19 to put a special investment, 30% of all the investment that will be done for the recovery of the COVID-19, and create jobs in a fast way that is specifically for sustainable projects, circular economy projects, and projects that go for the climate action. So this will help to make this very hard thing that has been the COVID pandemic also an opportunity to accelerate this transformation.
Okay, great. I mean, it sounds like you mentioned you're working on lots of different sectors, and you mentioned plastics, you mentioned looking at the recycling and waste management sector and how you can move that forward. How are you working with business in this? Because I know that in your development of the roadmap, I think you've got multiple people feeding into that. So how does that dialogue with business and the input from business support you?
Well, participation of the private sector is key because they're a strong, we say, motor of the economy, and they are convinced of the benefits of changing to the circular economy is very, very important. Circular economy is not only good for our, planet; it's also good for the pocket to, use less energy, to lose less of our raw material, and use it better in a better way to move from all kind of production of products to change that for giving services has a strong advantage for the economy and for people's lives. And that is why, we are working very strong with the private sector. We have an agreement with the private sector. We were one of the first countries to do that with the MacArthur Foundation. We have this plastic agreement with the private sector that, for example, now by 2025, all our plastic packages will be 100% compostable or reusable or recyclable. So this is, it's a big change in a very few years, because we are now with a very low rate of recycling in our country. We passed the law also, of the REP law, the extent responsibility of the producers. But with this agreement with the private sectors in plastic, we will go much further the application of this law. And I think this is really, really important, because the leadership that the private sector shows in this change can help us to move much faster.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you're really starting to highlight the economic benefit that comes from this, the social benefit, the importance of the jobs. Of course, there's an environmental side to this. I just want to think beyond Chile, just internationally. Where are you looking? Where would you like to see circular economy appear more strongly in the international dialogue? I know last year you were the presidents of the COP process. So, what are you looking for there?
This is very important that we know that the COVID pandemic is not the only pandemic that we are having right now. We continue having the climate crisis that we are facing all over the world, and it's not in quarantine. So we want to see also international forces that make this work together. The different convention, the different crises that we are facing right now, to build one common agenda for all of that. And then I think this is really, really important. We are facing now the COVID pandemic, and we want that our recovery plans, our green plans, sustainable plans that put all of this together. And we saw that can be pushed in a very strong way. That's why we are pushing for presenting NDCs for the countries this year, 2020, that includes in these NDCs specifically circular economy commitments. We did that in the middle of the pandemic last April. Chile presented a new, enhanced, very ambitious NDC, and in this NDC we include an integration pillar, we call, and this integration pillar has a specific commitments, not only in oceans, in woods, but also in circular economy. And this is important. You know, we commit this roadmap for national roadmap for circular economy in Chile for all the different sectors, as well as our strategy, a national strategy for organic waste that is really important. Is, I say, more than 58% of the garbage bags domestically. And, you know, we put a specific objectives in circular economy that for monitoring the advances in circular economy in our country. We're also working in APEC for a plastic way to see a more international agreement on plastics. And I think this is very important. What happens in the past, plastic pollution has no boundaries. So what other countries do affect us. We're seeing this in our beautiful Eastern Iceland, how is, you know, receiving all the plastic from this huge plastic island that are already on the oceans, and we see the microplastic arriving to our coast and our beaches. So we are working to put an international agenda on plastic in APEC. We have approved a roadmap for all literary debris that include plastic pollution, and this is all the plastic litter in the APEC, and also working in Latin America for a common roadmap to address the plastic problem.
Okay, great. Your enthusiasm and commitment is totally shining through in all of this, and there's so many topics that you mentioned there. I want to bring in Lena at this point because Minister Schmitz touched on plastic, touched on the opportunity in food. Lena, you work for a very large multinational business, IKEA, which is known to many people. You operate around the world. Furniture is the core thing you're identified with, but there's many other parts to your business too. Before we jump into how policy can help you on your transition, can you just give us a very brief flavor of like IKEA's commitments to circular economy so that we can sort of set the scene briefly?
Absolutely. But first of all, I would actually like to say thank you for the very inspiring roadmap from Chile. This is really inspiring to see that how we can collaborate from a business and a government perspective and see the same vision as you saw. So very inspiring. IKEA is working today in the total transformation of becoming a circular business. By doing this, we of course have to look internally first. So we have been spending some time to really understanding that this transformation hits every part of our business. We need to look at the product design. We need to look at the supply chain. We need to look at the logistics setup, the way we're going to meet customers separately and differently in the future. So it is a total transformation. But with this commitment, we also get to know our business much better. And we can also see the future completely different, because there is going to be different services. There's going to be a different way of communicating and a different way of engaging with people around the globe. But what is also really inspiring in the presentations before is, of course, that everybody has to be around the table, because we do have a commitment of becoming a circular business by 2030, but we can't do that by ourselves. We're not going to be circular in a non-circular economy. So I think it's going to be very inspiring to see how we can get many different actors around the table. And as you said yourself, actually, in the beginning, policy and policy making can set the direction. But I would say that even more, policy making can actually scale up, it can speed up, and it could enable those shifts that needs to happen, because this is a systemic change across businesses and across many actors of society.
Okay, great. So how can policy help you in IKEA with your transition? What are some of the key areas where you're looking for policy to come in and change the landscape so you can move forward faster?
First of all, since it does hit everywhere, you actually need to look at the policy differently when you talk about circular and move away, which I know has been talked about a lot during these days, from the extended producer responsible fixing the waste solution. I think that we really need to start to look into all the areas. It is around agriculture. It is around building and construction. It is about logistics. It's also about employment, different type of employment laws. It is about innovation in different ways and having incentives of that. So I do see that there's many possibilities here, but to widen the area that we are looking into to really help. Then that will help us too, because we can speed up and scale good ideas. We heard in the finance sections, there is tons of good ideas. We don't lack good ideas and innovation, but we do have sometimes barriers to scale them and make them reach many people.
Okay, great. So there's everybody needs to get around the table. We also need to slightly shift our thinking. How do you see public-private engagement going forward? There's certain, I think you mentioned to me before, a point about sort of our capabilities and our skills in taking this forward. What are your reflections on that?
I think that it is that we are actually moving in. I think we should invest in competences in many different areas, and that we together actually can come around the table and look into many different shifts here. So it's not one definition of it. It's not just classification of waste. It's not just how we transport. It's not just how we solve and clean up the broken chains. It is really looking into the prolonging of materials in society that could be reached by many people. So to come together and work maybe in different setups than we have done in the past will be very useful.
Okay. And last question before I bring in Shardul. There's often there's discussion about needing policies that are locally appropriate, but also policies that are aligned at an international level. And since you are a multinational, I just wondered what your reflections were on that. Where do you see the balance? What are your thoughts?
With my previous speakers here, I think that was very evident. We need to have a common language, a common agenda on an international level in order to actually make these big shifts. From an international company's perspective or organization perspective, that helps a lot in order to transition. But then on local level, you need the incentives. There is many different situations on a local level that needs to speed up. You can have incentives of different things to build up new infrastructure. But even there, of course, to have the common agenda together will help. So you need to have the local incentives and build up there, but you also have to have the common language on an international level.
Okay, so there is agency for policymakers at all different levels. So the local city policymakers, state policymakers, national policymakers, and then them all coming together at an international scale, which is a perfect moment actually to bring in Shardul, because you work at on national policies and questions of international alignment. Is that a fair summary of the where circular economy appears in your work?
To a large extent, yes. We also work at the subnational level. So some of my colleagues are also working at the city level, for example. And we also try to work quite a lot on harmonizing best practices across jurisdictions and also looking at transnational issues, particularly the role of international trade in the context of the circular economy. So yes, there's a central focus on national policies, but we also go a couple of levels down and also look at the transnational dimension.
Okay, great. Well, you just mentioned there the topic of policy alignment. Often in circular economy discussions, we're looking for new policies. How can we change the system? But I think you've done some work on also looking at where existing policies could be more effective if they were more aligned behind the sort of circular economy outcome, that vision that we're aiming for. Can you shed a bit of light on this policy misalignment question?
Right, absolutely. I mean, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, really struck a chord when you publicized, the notion of the butterfly diagram about the circular economy. And if I had to give an analogy for misalignments, I mean, what we have right now with national strategies is the butterfly of a circular economy fluttering above underlying misalignments in many policy jurisdictions. So let me just give you some examples of these misalignments. I think to make circular economy work at scale, we need to, it's not just about creating the playing field, it's about leveling the playing field between primary materials and secondary materials. I mean, we need to make secondary materials more economically attractive. And to do that, as a first measure, we need to cut down on subsidies for primary material extraction and use. And in many countries, for example, subsidies for metals extraction, primary metals, run into the billions of dollars. So I think that's one of the underlying misalignments that currently exists that needs to be addressed. Another issue is how we tax different factors of production. So if you look at the EU, for example, the taxes on pollution and resources are less than 1%. Taxes related to environment more broadly are 6%. Taxes on labor are 51%. Now, if we have to move to a circular economy, a lot of the activities are going to be much more labor and less capital intensive. So there's a very fundamental discussion that needs to take place in terms of taking a second look at the nature of the tax system and whether that needs to be fixed. I mean, I don't say that lightly. There are good reasons why the tax system exists the way it does, and there are many other factors to take it into account. But we really, beyond the policies and roadmaps and strategies, we need to get at the underlying incentives that shape the actions of private actors, but also the actions of producers. And this is where some of the misalignments lie.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Really helpful also with those figures on how, for example, in the case of tax, how that currently breaks down and where we might have opportunities to create other systems. You also mentioned trade, which is, I think, a kind of newer policy area that's come into the circular economy discussion. What are you looking at there in trade in relation to circular economy?
Indeed, it is a relatively new area, but it's gaining traction very rapidly. What we noticed a couple of years ago was that while there was a lot of focus on circular economy, most of the attention was at the national level or regional levels within a country or city level, but people were not looking at the interactions between economies. And I think the goal we should have is closing material loops, not within a jurisdiction, but ultimately at a global scale. And if there's a comparative advantage elsewhere in the world, then we should seek those opportunities to close the loops, even if they fall outside the jurisdiction. Now, of course, there are always issues with regard to international trade of materials, particularly, there are legitimate concerns about environmentally sound management of waste in many countries. So we have to make sure that if there is international trade, environmental standards are respected wherever the material gets traded. But right now, we have these challenges where there are significant barriers to the movement of, it's the whole issue of what is waste and what is a resource. So is a secondhand product a waste category, or is it resource? Is a piece of equipment which is going for remanufacturing to another jurisdiction because remanufacturing or recycling can be done at scale? How do we deal with waste regulations which were set up probably with a slightly different perspective? How do we adapt them to make sure that we can ensure circularity across national jurisdictions, but at the same time safeguard the environmental motivations behind those restrictions in the first place?
Okay, great. We are so nearly out of time, and I really wish we weren't, because there is so much more that I could talk about with all of you. You've recently, the last thing I wanted to flag is I think you've recently, in light of the pandemic, looked at the last financial crisis and done a brief assessment of the stimulus packages that were launched then. What are some of the key recommendations, just very, very briefly, that you have for policymakers now as they focus on investment and stimulating the economy this time around?
Right. So one big message is money is very important, and that's what everybody's talking about. How much of the stimulus packages are directed towards green investments or low carbon and circular economy and so on. But money is not everything. And what we discovered was policy design is almost as critical. So a lot of times what happens in the wake of a crisis is that money is spent very quickly, and there's not enough time to have proper reflection and design the policies well. So the case we are making to our governments is, yes, you need to do a lot more to direct the investments towards green activities. At the same time, make sure you're not directing other investments towards brown activities. And that's a big concern right now, because our assessment is even in the current state of stimulus packages worldwide, there are probably more brown investments which are committed than green. So that's a big issue. But then we need to focus at designing those investments and how they're implemented in the right way so that we get the maximum environmental benefit that these investments are intended for.
Great, and that design piece brings us right back to why we have, for example, Lena on in this discussion, because we need all the voices at the table, and it's also something that Minister Schmidt alluded to in terms of the plastic pact, making sure there are lots of voices at the table, also doing that in your roadmap development. That is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us from the respective locations around the world, and for bringing this topic of policy and circular economy to life. Thank you to the audience for tuning in and participating online, and for also being part of making this transition happen. We all have our part to play. So we are rapidly drawing to the end of this very first Circular Economy online forum with the World Circular Economy Forum. And just to conclude it all for us, let's go back to the Helsinki studio.
Thank you so much, Miranda, and before Miranda, Ashima as well. I really wish I could have teleported to the Isle of Wight to be with you in the studio. But I think now we have about 10 minutes to wrap up, and I have written a lot of notes here that I thought I would read off the script, literally just read off this to cover as much as possible, because there's so much that's happened.
Are you sure, Tim?
Well, do you have any other ideas?
Well,
how do we wrap this up? There are so much that's happened.
I think our audience might be getting slightly tired of us recapping. Should we just try something new?
I don't know.
Something different?
Well, there's a bunch of people there. I think, yeah, let's bring our colleagues in. There's Rikku, and there's Pauli, Malena, and Laura. Could you give us a sort of a recap of what's happened? Let's start with Laura.
Thank you, Tim. So, North America is building and framing the concept of circular economy. It is important to tell the story around circular economy in a way that resonates with people. Storytelling, the economic and other opportunities of circular economy is very important. Show the good cases. Illustrate how circular economy can have positive impact. I think that is very important, and I can't wait the stories we will hear next year in Toronto.
Thank you, Laura. Well, as we heard, circular economy looks a bit different everywhere in the world. So adaptation should also be done in a manner that takes into account the local specialties, solutions, as well as spices. In Africa, the circular economy is taking quantum leaps, and businesses can really take lead even though the regulation is not quite there yet. Investing in circularity will lift the development potential to max and also create decent jobs while doing it. And empowering and educating women and youth will lead the way to an inclusive transition.
Yes, Laura mentioned the storytelling. I was touched by the story of Vancouver yesterday about the old houses, 100 years old houses which were taken down, and somebody noticed that, wait a minute, there's at least 300 years old wood in the houses. Are you going to throw them away? Obviously not. And these are things that we have to notice. It's not by the government. Anyhow, government has a role also. Government traditionally uses regulation, taxes, but also we noticed that yesterday the government procurement in many countries, for example in the Netherlands, we heard yesterday, is 15% of the GDP. And that's really, really powerful tool. But everybody financing companies needs to see profitability and sound business models. And of course, if these businesses are healthy, then everything happens. We heard today excellent quote by Ellen MacArthur saying that if we have problems in the economy, let's solve the problems by the economy itself. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul, and my dear colleagues.
Yeah, when talking about businesses, we heard that COVID-19 has really kind of like shook companies to rethink the current way of making businesses. And it has been really encouraging to hear that circular business models and collaboration are seen as a crucial tool to get over these really weird times going on. We also heard that being circular means being resilient. Now in terms of the pandemic and in future when we are adapting to our planetary boundaries. I truly believe that circularity and resilience can be seen in companies' bottom line. And I think that's why all of us who are working with businesses should put circular business models into practice. That was 45 seconds as planned, and back to Tim and Veera to the studio.
Well, thank you very much to our fantastic colleagues for helping out. I think we needed that.
Oh, indeed.
And we still have something in store for you. And I am delighted to introduce the future WCEF organizers. We'll be having Roald Lapeur back, the Director General at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, Netherlands. And also Peter Schiefke, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Canada. And soon here at the studio with us, Citra's own Mika Sulkinoja as well. So over to Roald, I believe.
Thank you very, very much. And let me start by of course, commending you and the team that has organized this online World Circular Economy Forum with a great conference. I'm very impressed. Of course, a conference like this is meant to share ideas, to share action, but also to inspire each other. And I think that is exactly what you have achieved. And I was really delighted to participate in some events, but I'm hearing very good feedback from what was happening also at the events I didn't personally attend. So great conference. What I hope you and everyone should expect is that we build upon the work of these 2 days, build upon the work done by Citra, by Finland, by Canada, and by many others, because we really believe it is the time, especially today, to seize the enormous opportunities that a circular economy can bring to the world, but also can bring to each and every one of us. So we are very honored. I am personally very honored that on behalf of the government of the Netherlands, I can announce that the Netherlands and Citra will jointly host a World Circular Economy Forum plus Climate in April 2021, on the 15th of April 2021 to be very precise, a high-level conference that will bring together decision makers from around the world. And the main theme of this World Circular Economy Forum plus Climate is what is in a name, climate. And I think these 2 days, many have emphasized that 50%, almost 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the world are related to material use. And this for us was the main reason to believe that we should and can and must give attention to that fact and to see how the climate economy and actions in the climate economy can contribute to a carbon neutral world we all want to achieve. So that will be the main focus of the conference. It speaks for itself, of course, that everyone will be able to follow the conference online. We're incredibly excited to work with Citra, with Finland, with Canada, as well as with many others, because it is you participating that will make conferences like this a success, but make a circular economy a success as well, because we cannot do this alone. We need to do this together as countries, as businesses, but also as consumers and as citizens. I realize we have big shoes to fill after what I've seen those 2 days, but I'm happy to take over the baton and try to make as good as a conference as you have done, and then of course hand the baton on to Canada again, because we have much more, I think, in store next year when it comes to the World Circular Economy Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roald, and thank you for the words of encouragement as well. And next we will go over to, I believe, to Canada.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Lepere. Bonjour et bon tout le monde. We've had so many important and inspiring discussions during the WCEF online, with more to come at the event in the Netherlands. I agree 100%. I think we have some big shoes to fill, but I think we're up to the task. These conversations are incredibly important. One thing that is clear from our discussions today is that we all fully understand the enormous opportunity that the circular economy presents to us, and will help us respond to the crisis we're facing from not only the pandemic, but from climate change and from biodiversity loss. And that's why I have to say we are very excited as Canadians that these discussions will continue at the WCEF 2021 in Toronto from September 13th to the 15th, 2021, because it's going to mark the first time that the annual forum is held in North America. It's not only going to bring dynamic new voices to the global conversation and take an in-depth look at circular opportunities in North America and in the global context, but it's also going to explore game-changing actions and systemic changes that are needed to accelerate the global circular transition. So we're really looking forward to working with Citra, with the Netherlands, and with all of our partner organizations to develop an exciting program. And we look forward to actively engaging with all of you again in this conversation. And I hope to see many of you, if not all of you and more, at the WCEF online forum that will be held in Toronto next year. Donc, merci beaucoup tout le monde. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much to Peter Schiffke and Roald Lepere. And as you can see, this is how the WCF baton moves forward. But with me at the studio, I have a dear colleague, Mika Sulkinoja, who's the project director for WCF and obviously known as Mr. WCF within Citra. And Mika, I just wanted to really just touch upon the fact how the WCF story has evolved. And it was first launched by Citra in 2017. Now, we've been 3 times around the sun, as we say here, and we've been to Finland, Japan, and now we are obviously here at the WCF online, moving next to the Netherlands and Canada. And what has since happened on the CE front since we began this concept?
A lot of things have happened. I think it's fair to say that circular economy has gone from theory to practice, has gone from niche to mainstream. While it's fair to say that very much work in progress regarding both of those statements, but we have certainly gone a long way. The number of countries, regions drafting strategies for circularity is increasing, has increased over the last few years. The number of corporations integrating circularity into their core business strategies is increasing, not just treating circularity as part of the sustainability reporting. But perhaps the most intriguing thing for me is the entrepreneurial, the innovation landscape. We had the opportunity as part of the preparations to take a peek, radar the whole globe, what is happening, what is bubbling under in terms of innovations. And we're showcasing 39 of those, the top of the iceberg of what we saw during that project. And it's great to see the circle of natives, young entrepreneurs with new business ideas coming into this business space with their ideas.
And speaking of ideas, that's what really WCEF is all about, is sharing the ideas, bringing people together, that collaboration aspect that we heard a lot about today as well.
That's true, and we like the idea of storytelling. People do need to know what the success looks like Ellen MacArthur today said. There are 2 aspects to that. The stories inspire us, and then we need to recognize that these stories, they don't happen in isolation. It's the context which enables them to be successful. That's our job, to portray them in a context.
And speaking of inspiration, what have been your personal WCF highlights? And you can even share behind the scenes highlights now.
Yeah, rather than the destination, my highlight is the journey. This whole forum is a co-creation exercise with our partners. Two of them just spoke there. It's been fascinating to try and shape the circularity agenda in this network together with our international partners. But perhaps one of the highlights is the hijacking of a young delegation last year at the Finlandia Hall. Although it was to some extent arranged hijacking, they hijacked the main stage, but they meant serious business. I could tell by the gestures and the look in their eyes that they insisted us to change our consumer behavior and insisted us to respect the planetary boundaries. And that was an emotional, but still an inspirational moment for us as a group, WCF group.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I witnessed that hijack as well, and it was something quite special. Well, thank you very much, Mika. Stay with us, because unfortunately,
we're running out of time.
We're running out of time.
That? These six sessions. But fortunately, this is not it's not the beginning of the end. This will continue for a long time, and we have more than 70 side events happening throughout the fall. And then in April, we turn our eyes to the Netherlands, and in September next year, we turn our eyes to Canada. So stay in touch, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed, and see you soon.